Okay, so good morning. Let's start today on our backs, actually. I have noticed with the stress in my life right now that this is how I almost always want to start. So I'll start on our backs. One hand on your stomach, one hand on your heart, and just close your eyes and notice your breath. Just observe it. Are you breathing high into your chest? Are you breathing short? Are you breathing into your stomach? Are your breath smooth or ragged? And as you've noted your breath and kind of watched it for a minute, now just deepen it a little bit. Draw it deeper into your belly. Is there a spot in your body that's kind of tight this morning? Can you breathe your breath to that spot and just notice it? And then if you'd like to keep your breath or keep your eyes closed for a little bit, you can do that. Or you can blink your eyes open and bring your hands to either side of your hips on that. And just gently start to rock your sacrum back and forth. So your tailbone toward the ceiling, and then tailbone toward the mat. Tailbone toward the ceiling, tailbone toward the mat. Just be aware of that beautiful bone that is your sacrum, and try and get the entire length of it to come in contact with the mat at some point. It takes up a good chunk of our bodies. And then pause that rocking and try to find a neutral spot. You've touched, hopefully every part of it or the length of it now. Just try and find that spot that naturally comes into contact with the mat. Feel that little bit of curve in your lower back as you let that part of your sacrum rest on the mat. And just kind of take note of that spot. And then start to lift your tailbone up toward the ceiling. And we'll go all the way up into bridge, just lifting one vertebrae at a time. Just nice and slowly. Extending our awareness to our entire spine. And slowly lower down, one vertebrae at a time. Notice which parts of your vertebrae are a little bit tricky to articulate. And once again, start with your tailbone, all the way up to the ceiling, or lift your hips up toward the ceiling. And lower down, one vertebrae at a time. Then, with your hips on the mat, just let your knees fall open. And a couple more times, lift your hips toward the ceiling. And slowly lower to the mat. Lift your hips toward the ceiling. And slowly lower to the mat. And just bring your legs out straight in front of you. Reach your arms up above your head. Kind of a wake up stretch. With your left hand, grab a hold of your right wrist and just try to curve your spine into a C. So your feet and your hands move toward the left. You feel a nice stretch along the left side of your body, along the right side of your body. Then come back to center with your right hand, grab your left wrist and curve your body to the other side. So your feet and hands move toward the right. A nice stretch on your left. And release. Come back to the center. Bring your feet back to the mat in front of your hips. And bring your left heel toward the ceiling. Reach behind your quad or your hamstring there. Try to find that neutral spot of your sacrum again. And that gentle curve of your lower back. And then just press your hamstring into your hand and your hand into your hamstring. Maybe do some ankle circles here. And then release with your hands and press your heel towards straight. So your leg is still raised toward the ceiling. And just slowly lower that leg down to the mat. Don't bring it all the way to the mat. Hover it just above the mat. Bring your hands to your hips and try to keep your hips not moving here as we start to draw circles with our heel on the wall. Just be mindful of that neutral spot on your sacrum. Be mindful of any spot in your body that you're bringing stress to as you do this. Just try to relax any place else. Reverse the circles. So your neck, your shoulders, forehead. And then bring your heel just back to hovering. And bring your leg out as if you were doing a snow angel with your legs. So take your heel away from the center line and then drop back toward the center line. Just hovering right above the ground and keeping your hips from moving. Just back and forth. One more. And now you can let that heel drop to the mat and just drag it toward your hips. And then reach the right foot toward the ceiling and reach around behind your hamstring. And press your hamstring into your hands and your hands into your hamstring. Being aware of that neutral spot on your sacrum. Maybe do some ankle circles. The other direction. And release your hands to your hips, stretch that heel toward the ceiling, and then slowly lower that leg down toward the mat. Hover it just above with your hands on your hips. And then start to draw those circles, keeping your hips still. Go the other direction. If you need to slow down to stay still, that brings a lot of needed strength. So go ahead and slow down. And then pause, and with your heel hovering just above the floor, do that snow angel movement with your leg. Draw it away from the midline and back to the midline. Still trying to keep your hips still. And trying to keep strain out of your shoulders and your neck. Okay. And then let that heel drop toward the mat or onto the mat finally. Draw your heel toward your hips. And then place your left ankle on your right knee and press your hips toward the ceiling. Stretch out the front of those hips that we were just using. Bring your hips down toward the mat. Put your left foot down. Bring your right ankle to your left knee. Press toward the ceiling. Slowly lower down. Okay. And then roll onto your stomach. And we will start in Sphinx pose here. And we're just going to slide this right arm away from us, but try to keep your forearm and your palm on the mat as you slide, and try to keep your right shoulder in the same spot. So just slide it away from you and draw it back and press away, keeping that whole forearm on the mat. Trying to keep your elbow on the mat till the very last, and draw it back and press away. And feel this in your back, kind of under your shoulder blades. Okay, this time when you bring your hand back, rotate your hand out, your arm out to about 45 degrees, and then press away again. It's interesting how that little change changes the sensation of this movement. Press away, draw it back, and then last time, press away, keeping that whole arm and elbow on the mat, and draw it back. And we'll do the other side. So I kind of like to put my right hand on my left shoulder as I do this, to kind of be aware of how much my shoulder is moving. And then press your hand and your forearm into the mat, and then slide away from you. And draw it back. And slide it away, keeping that elbow on the mat. And draw it back. Feeling those muscles under your shoulder blades warm up. Draw it back. Last time. And then rotate your arm out 45 degrees. And slide it away to you at that angle. Notice the difference of sensation. Just go back and forth at your own pace. And notice if one side is easier than the other. And last time. Draw it back. And then with this left hand, slide it underneath your right armpit. So your arms are kind of at a T here. You'll straighten your right arm up alongside your ear. If your forehead's on the mat, slide your arm up along your ear and reach your left arm to the right. And then just let your shoulders kind of sink down toward the mat. Kind of stretch out that shoulder a little bit. Try to lengthen and smooth your breath here. And then unwind. Straighten your left arm long on the mat and reach your right arm toward the left underneath your left armpit. And let your shoulders drop toward the mat. Your breath coming 360 degrees into your chest. Release that and bring your right arm to kind of a goalpost to the right, your right elbow in line with your right shoulder and your elbow at 90 degrees. And then roll over onto your right side, stretching out the front of your chest on that right side. Okay. And then come back to center. And with your left arm, bring your left elbow the same height as your shoulder and your elbow at 90 degrees, and then roll over onto the other side. And that nice stretch in your chest, and if you can have your Head on the mat, that's great. Let your shoulder just kind of release toward the mat. And come back to center. And then come to Sphinx pose, but actually press your hips back towards your heels into child's pose. And just actively kind of pull your hips and your hands away from each other and feel a little bit of stretch underneath your armpit there. And then press your hands into the mat as you start to come up to seated. And keep your hands on the mat, come up to kind of standing kneel, let your arms come off the mat, reach toward the back, the wall behind you, and then rotate up, reach toward the ceiling, and then come back down to child's pose. And this time, as you're sliding back towards your knees, let your left hand come off the mat, but keep your right hand on the mat as it reaches back towards your right heel. Reach it to the wall behind you and rise up, reach toward the ceiling with both hands and come back down to the mat, child's pose. We'll do the other side. So slide your hands along the mat. Let your right hand come off the mat. Slide your left hand back toward your left heel. Reach it to the wall behind you. And have your hands meet as they reach toward the ceiling. We'll do both sides one more time. So come down to child's pose. Slide your hands towards your knees. Let your left hand come off the mat. Slide your right hand back towards your ankle. Reach to the wall behind you. And meet your arms reaching toward the ceiling. And slide down to the mat, or come down to the mat. And slide your hands. Let your right hand come off the mat. Keep sliding back towards your left heel. Reach to the wall behind you. Have your hands meet, reaching toward the ceiling. Just pause here and find your core a little bit. Just bring your awareness to your core. Drawing your hip points together, letting your shoulders slide down your back, letting your lower ribs soften in. And then keeping a straight line from your knees to your fingertips. Hinge at your hips to plank back, using all that support you just gathered from your core, and come back up. And plank back one more. Well, we'll do this a couple times. Keeping that straight line from your knees to your fingertips. All of that support in your core. Just go back and forth. And one more time. Just plank back. And come back up. Tuck your toes underneath. And then plank back. And try to get close to your limit there. And then let your right hand fall back towards your right heel. Let your hand rest on your heel. Reach back, putting your left hand alongside your left ear. And then draw your hip points together as you reach them away from your arm, away from your heels. And do that side stretch along the left side. And let your left arm come down to help you come back to your standing kneel. Reach your arms up toward the ceiling. Think about that core engagement again. Hip points, softening your ribs, letting your shoulder blades drop. Plank back, straight line from your knees to your fingertips. And this time let your left hand drop to your left ankle. And let it rest there. And draw your hip points together as you press your hips away from your heels. And reach your arm toward the back corner. Your right arm toward the back corner. Doing that side stretch along the right. And then release your arm down to easily come back up to a standing kneel. And come down to child's pose. Bringing your head to the mat. And just shake your head no. Not forehead massage. And then slide into Sphinx pose. And on your legs are behind you, straight. You can tuck or untuck your toes, whichever is more comfortable. And then, just for reference, start to press your chest, your spine up toward the ceiling. So you're pressing into the mat with your elbows. And then let your spine just drop down toward the mat, sort of cat and cow here. Just feel how much movement you can create just by sliding around your shoulders here as you press into the mat. And then let your spine sink. Okay, this time, tuck your toes behind you, round your chin in, lift your chest as you round toward the ceiling. Then lift your belly and lift your hips and your thighs and your knees so that you're in plank pose here. And then walk up to plank. So right hand underneath you and left hand underneath you. And then we're gonna walk into like a floating table or beast. So walk your right foot forward, keeping your knee floating, and walk your left foot forward, keeping your knee floating. Pressing into the mat firmly with your hands, shoulders out of your ears. And then step your left foot back to plank, step your right foot back to plank. Come down on your left forearm, come down on your right forearm, and then bring your knees to the mat and roll your body back down to your starting point. Untuck your toes and reach your chest forward. I'll do that one more time. So tuck your chin, lift your chest off the mat, lift your ribs and your belly, then your hips and your thighs, tuck your toes, let your knees come off the mat. Walk up to plank, so your left hand and then your right hand, and then walk your left foot forward to the floating table, and the right foot forward to the floating table. See if you can smooth out your breath here. And step your right foot back to plank, left foot back to plank, right forearm down, left forearm down, and then drop your knees and let your body slowly roll back to that Sphinx pose, reaching your chin or your heart forward. And then just press back to table. Inhale, and then with an exhale, bring your left foot forward in between your hands. And just slowly start to rock your weight forward and back. Stretching the front of your right hip and your hamstring. And then with your weight forward, bring your hands inside your left foot. Walk your left foot out a little bit and maybe walk it forward just a little bit to find lizard pose. So let your hips release toward the mat. If you want to let that left knee fall out to the left for a little extra stretch. If you can bring your forearms to the mat, feel free to do so. Just remember that you want to keep your heart opening toward the wall in front of you. And then bring that knee back upright, frame your foot, tuck your right toes and lift your right knee off the mat. And then put your weight into your left heel there. Slowly lift your hands off the mat and then hinge up into warrior one here. And crescent lunge. And we've kind of worked with your hip points. We've talked about this core engagement, but just kind of let your core relax just a little bit and feel how, let your right hip swing out toward the right just a little bit. And then, so you can kind of feel a little relaxed, and then start to engage your left hip to draw it back, to bring your hips back to parallel or back to square with the short edge of the mat. You can bring your hands to your hips if this is easier to play with. And just rotate your hips to the side and then draw them back to parallel. And do this a couple times and kind of feel the difference between your hips being kind of relaxed and out or engaged and parallel. Feel the difference in where you put your weight in your feet when you do this. And try to find a spot that feels really good and solid, and you're not feeling pressure, like weird pressure in your hips or your knees. And then just enjoy that, how that kind of gets that left hip really working for you. Then bring our arms back up above you. And we'll just do a couple of tilts here. So now that you've found your nice solid support and you've got your left hip turned on, reach up and then just hinge at the hips with your torso as a plank to bring your torso down towards your knee, and then press back up to standing or up. So you're reaching for the ceiling and then hinge down, hinge back up, and then bring your hands to your hips, put your weight in that left heel, step up to Tadasana, and bring the left heel to your right knee, and just sit back into a figure four chair pose. If you can find your balance. And let that left hip get a little bit of a stretch there. And notice where you're putting your weight in your right foot. Can you use your right hip a little bit more to find stability? Okay. Kind of standing, reach for the ceiling, shake your legs out a little bit. Hinge at the hips and come down to a forward fold. Put your hands on your shins with a flat back. And then engage back body. And then lower down, release down toward the mat. Step back with your right foot. Step back with your left foot into plank. And then slowly lower your body down one big piece to the mat. And find yourself in Sphinx pose again. And we're going to try those body, rolls again. So tuck your chin and lift your chest off the mat, your ribs off the mat, your belly off the mat, hips, thighs, and knees. So you're in a forearm plank. And walk your hands up to plank. So right hand under you and left hand under you. Then walk your right foot forward and your left foot forward to this floating table or beast. And then walk your left foot back, and your right foot back, and your left arm down, and your right arm down. And let your knees fall to the mat. And let your body roll back into Sphinx. And stretch your chest toward the wall in front of you. And then tuck your chin and start to roll back up. So lift your chest and ribs, belly, hips, thighs. Tuck your toes and lift your knees. Walk up to plank with your left hand and your right hand. And then walk your left foot forward and your right foot forward. And step your right foot back, left foot back into your right forearm and your left forearm. Let your knees come down. Let your body roll down. And stretch your chest toward the front of the room. Always a relief to let my knees come down. And then press up into table. Inhale, and with the exhale, bring the right foot forward. And start to rock your weight back and forth. Find your own pace here. The sliding always a lot slower. There's so much more going on, I feel like, in my right leg. So just notice any differences you have. Then with your weight forward, bring both hands inside your right foot. Let your right foot walk out and forward a little bit. Then let your right knee fall out to the side. Keeping your ankle engaged so you're not sickling your ankle. And if you want to come down to your forearms here, you can feel free to do that. But let your hips just kind of release toward the mat. And appreciate that big stretch in your right hip. And come to bring your weight in your hands, lift up that left knee, bring your right foot back to plank, and then press back into downward facing dog. Enjoy just this nice, it's a pretty active stretch, but full body engagement here. Finding length between your hands and your hips. And then inhale, step your right foot forward and press into that right heel to come into a crescent lunge. You can let your hands release down towards your hips, and here, just play with that hip opening. So kind of open your hips to the left and then draw your right hip back and engage it to bring your hips to square with the short edge of your mat. And just back and forth until you can feel that engagement and that support that really works for you. And you might even want to draw your right hip back a little bit extra, just so you can feel the full range of where your hips could be. And find that nice square or semi-square, whatever is your engagement there. Reach toward the ceiling. Now that you've got that right hip really turned on, hinge at your hips to bring your torso down toward your knee. Keeping that hip reaching backwards and really working to support you. Press into that right heel to come upright. Hinge forward. Making your hip work. Drawing it back as you draw your arms toward the ceiling. Hands to your hips. Weight in your right heel. Step forward. Bring that right heel to your left knee. And sit back. into a figure 4 chair pose. You can bring your hands to your heart. Draw your left hip back just a little bit. It might just be in your mind to keep your left hip engaged as your right hip stretches. And then release and slowly step this right foot back into a lunge. And bring your hands down to the mat. Walk them toward the long edge of your mat. Parallel your feet toward the long edge of the mat, and just let your body, your torso, and your head release toward the mat as you use both feet to press your hips up toward the ceiling. Maybe shake your head no, and yes, just to feel it really release there. And then walk your hands over toward the right side. Turn your right toes out and bend your right knee into a lunge. Bring your right elbow to your right knee and your left arm alongside your ear here. So your back toes will turn in just a little bit. And for just a minute, bring your left hand to your hip and play with that hip swivel that we were just doing in crescent lunge. So you can let your hip drop toward the mat and then draw your hip up toward the ceiling as you press into your right heel. And feel how your right hip engages differently in each of these spots. Feel how your torso is supported up and out of your knee or relaxes down towards your knee at different places. So just rotate your hip down. This last time, rotate it up and bring your arm back over your ear. Hopefully you found a spot that feels good and that your right hip is supporting you. Enjoy that open. And then drop your right hand down to your hip, hinge up, and we'll switch over to the left side. So turn your left toes out and your right toes turn in a little bit. Bring your left elbow to your left knee and just rest your right arm or hand on your hip as you let that right hip drop toward the mat. Kind of rotate down and then draw your hip up toward the ceiling. Just feel your left hip work. Be sure you're pressing into your left heel as you do this. Maybe as your hip drops down, different parts of your feet engage to support you. Where is it easiest for you to not feel any kinks? Just kind of be aware of how your body feels in each part of these rotations. And with your hip open, at whatever feels good for you, reach your right arm over your ear. And lifting your torso just like out of your knee. Let your hands drop down to the mat and welcome to the center. Parallel your feet again. And release your torso and your head to the mat as you lift your hips up toward the ceiling. And maybe just do slight lunges to either side to get that inside of your leg a little bit. And then walk your hands over to the left and scoot that left foot out from underneath you so that you can bring your left hip to the mat. Sorry, that wasn't. Bring your left shin in line with the short edge of your mat here. Stretch your right leg behind you, but It's not going to be a straight line because it's just kind of reaching back there. Not doing anything specific just yet. Bring your hands to the mat with your right hand in front of your right shin. And let your shoulders kind of come square with the mat. And then just let them lower toward the mat as you feel that stretch in your IT band, your left IT band. Press up and kind of bring this right knee into the center so that you've got your legs at kind of 90-90 set up. Your hips, your knees, and your ankles are at 90 degrees. Bring your hands to either side of your left thigh, pressing into this left hip because you still don't quite have your right hip on the mat. Find a long spine, reach the crown of your head up, and then lift this right heel off the mat. It's not going to move very far, but focus on this long spine here. Then lift your knee off the mat, so your whole shin, and then externally rotate that leg to bring your heels toward each other, and then set that right heel down next to your left heel. Finding your long spine in the midst of that and just hinging forward at your hips for a little bit of a stretch here. And then come upright, put your hands on either side of your right thigh. Lift your left ankle off the mat, internally rotate it. Trying to keep a long spine the whole time. Drop behind you and let your left knee come to the mat and then your left heel. Okay. And then we're gonna have to turn just a little bit, but bring your right shin parallel to the short edge of the mat here. Stretch your leg out behind you. Bring your left hand in front of your right shin. I said that on as well. Square your shoulders toward the mat, and then just come down over that knee, whatever is comfortable. Okay, you're getting that IT stretch in this leg as well. Release. Draw your right heel underneath your left hip and then roll up onto your shin. And this time your left knee or your left leg will be straight out behind you. Draw your knees toward one another as you bring your forearms to the mat for pigeon pose. And if you want to bring your head to the mat, just try to keep that engagement of your knees drawing toward each other. Press back up. Bring your knees back to this 90-90. Find your hands on either side of your right thigh, and then lift your right heel, focusing on having a really long spine. Lift your left heel, and your left knee, and then externally rotate, and bring your heels together. Find a long spine and reach your tailbone toward the back as you hinge at your hips for a little bit of a stretch. And then come up, bring your hands on either side of your left thigh. Lift that right heel, internally rotate. Keeping a long spine, then bring that right knee to the mat, and left heel to the mat. And then bring your hands to this short side of the mat and kind of turn a little bit to bring your left heel under your right hip. And rock up onto your shin a little bit. Draw your knees toward one another and come down onto your forearms. If you want to drop your head to the mat, you can do that. And then drop both hips to the mat. Bring your legs in front of you to the long edge of your mat. Open your legs out wide. And a nice tall spine. If you need to sit on something to find a tall spine, feel free. And keeping your toes reaching toward the ceiling. Reach your tailbone to the wall behind you and hinge at your hips. And walk your hands out in front of you. Just keep your toes pointed up. And tailbone reaching back. And when you find a pretty good spot, kind of your sweet spot there, then you can release some of that tension out of your shoulders and your neck. But keep that tailbone reaching back. Walk your hands over to the left to frame your left foot. Reach your heart toward your toes. And walk your hands over to the right. Bring your right leg. And reach your heart toward your toes there. Come upright. And come to lying on your back. Draw your knees toward your armpits. Grab the outside of your feet for happy baby. Reach your heels toward the ceiling and resist with your hands. Reaching your tailbone toward the mat gently. And releasing your shoulders down toward the mat. And then let your right leg go straight. Release it and let it fall straight to the mat. And with your right hand, draw your left knee toward the right. And then reach your left arm out in a T to the side. So enjoy this nice twist. Letting both shoulders release toward the mat and finding a little bit of openness in your collarbone. And roll towards center. Straighten your left leg out. And with your left hand, grab your right knee and draw it to the left. Straighten your right hand out to a T behind you, kind of. Look out at those hands, at your right fingers. And let your shoulders relax into the mat as you find openness in your collarbone. Notice your breath. Hopefully it's slowing down by this point. Roll back to center. Bring your heels toward your hips. And we'll do one more bridge pose so that your hands come to the mat beside either hip. And press your hips toward the ceiling. Maybe walk your shoulders under your back a little bit, a little more motion, range of motion. Still finding space between your chin and your chest. Pressing evenly into both feet. And then slowly lower down. And draw your knees back to your armpits for one more happy baby pose. This time, move around in it, rock back and forth. And then release your legs to the mat. Stretch them out in front of you, about as wide as the mat. Bring your arms out to the side. And just start to relax into the mat. Let all those muscles around your hips relax. And let your hips sink into the mat. And your legs getting heavier. Let your shoulders melt into the mat as your arms get heavier. Release the tension in your neck. Relax your jaw. Relax the muscles around your eyes as your head gets heavier. Appreciate your whole body melting into the mat. And as you're ready, start to wiggle your fingers and your toes. And roll over onto your side. Press up to seated. Thank you for practicing with me today. The divine light in me honors the divine light in you. Namaste.